Right, so the US and Israel are at it again. Another Iran plot, another shadowy network, another whisper of nefarious forces moving pieces across borders like a bad spy novel. Iran, they said, had tried to have Israel's ambassador in Mexico assassinated. Bold claim. Presented like settled fact, though. And then, well, Mexico walked into the conversation, didn't they? Told them to stop being so wet and rubbished the claim completely. No reports whatsoever, they said. No investigation. No alert. Mexico didn't argue, Mexico didn't posture, Mexico didn't even slow down. It just said there was nothing there. No file, no case, no attempt. Stop telling tales, you lot. The story didn't fail because Iran pushed back. It failed because the place it was supposed to have happened refused to entertain the notion that Israel and the US were presenting. Why, when matters between Israel and Iran have largely calmed down, is Israel and Trump trying this on again? Especially in regards to a supposed event on the other side of the planet at that. Desperation just doesn't seem to be a big enough word to describe this, does it? Right, so they've now said Iran have tried to have the Israeli ambassador in Mexico assassinated, delivering the line as fact, delivering it like something already proven, like it was all over the news or something like that. A senior US official saying the Quds force was behind it. Oh, how dare they? But then more detail very, very quickly appeared about recruitment routes, about intermediaries, about movement through Venezuela. So you're trying to implicate them too now, are you? Two birds with one stone, is it? It's kind of detail that sounds like evidence if you're not paying attention, though, doesn't it? But there was no investigation shown. There wasn't one. No arrest, no intercept, no documents to prove it. Just a claim stated with confidence and the expectation that the confidence they'd said it with would be enough. The old voice of power assuming the room would just nod along with them, as they always used to do. But then Mexico answered, and the room didn't nod along with it. It stopped instead. The Secretariat of Foreign Affairs didn't hesitate, didn't soften, didn't defer. They said there were no reports whatsoever of any attempt on the Israeli ambassador's life. No case file, no alert, no joint operation, nothing. The Secretariat of Security backed the statement without pause. Two agencies, same line, same finality. Mexico rejected the story wholesale. And the US haven't corrected either. Israel haven't followed up. There was no scramble to shore up the claim, no intelligence graphic, no grainy stills of any dodgy-looking suspects, not even Benjamin Netanyahu carrying a picture of a bomb. Nothing to hold the narrative together once the host state refused to carry it. A claim like that only works if the country it's pinned to confirms it happened, and Mexico didn't do that. The claim had nowhere to stand, so it dropped like a stone. And Iran didn't have to say a word, did they? But they did. Calm, flat, fabricated, deliberate, embassy tone, statement issued and left where it fell. No escalation, no press push, and then nothing from Washington, nothing from Tel Aviv, no second briefing, no evidence packet, no follow-on narrative. The story just stopped moving. And the timing of all of this is quite significant, actually, because Trump had already said he was very much in charge of the strikes on Iran back in June now, during that 12-day conflict between Iran and Israel. Well, Iran just loved that, as you can imagine. Sent that statement to the United Nations, who will probably wring their hands a bit over it. But that letter from Iran to the UN now is logged. It's now become part of the actual record. And once something sits in that record, it doesn't need to be argued anymore. It just waits until the right time for it to come to light again does. The impact comes the next time someone tries to build a story that contradicts it. So the picture stood like this. An accusation with no ground, a denial with sovereign authority, a filing with legal consequence, and a silence afterwards that said more than a press conference ever could push. They didn't push the narrative because they couldn't. There simply was no narrative to push. Why, oh why, did you decide to make this excuse? And that's where the break is in this. Not in the accusation, not in the denial, but in the stall. In the gap where power used to move automatically, in the space where the world used to fall in line when Washington pointed and said, "This is a threat." That space is gone now. Iran didn't win anything here. That's not what happened. Iran just stayed standing when this story broke and fell apart quickly after. A strong, independent Iran sits in the middle of the region like a weight, you see. The kind you can't move, the kind you work around, the kind that still upsets the US, the kind that changes the shape of everything else without lifting a hand. The accusation was supposed to restore the old frame. Iran as aggressor, Iran as destabilizer, Iran as the bad guy, the bogeyman. Iran as the one that must be handled, must be dealt with. The denial froze that frame mid-gesture. They left it hanging, visibly unsupported, egg on face of their accusers. And the thing about a story breaking like that is that it doesn't break loudly. There's no headline that says we lost control of this narrative. That happens in the quiet. in the non-statement, in the way officials don't return calls to clarify anymore, in the way the headline dies after just one news cycle. Mexico didn't need to make a scene. It didn't call out the US. It didn't call out Israel. It didn't actually accuse anyone of lying. It just stated the record inside its borders. What you're saying didn't happen. And those few words did more damage than any diplomatic protest ever could, because they revealed something that isn't supposed to be visible. The Washington's narrative does not automatically travel anymore. It used to. It doesn't anymore. And in the region, that lands harder than any missile strike, because every state from Beirut to Baghdad to Doha to Ankara has lived under the shape of that narrative for decades. Aggressor and defender, threat and shield, stability and force. It was always presented as the natural order. Something that just was, something inevitable. But inevitability only exists as long as nobody refuses it loud. And Mexico just did. No punishment, no price, no consequence. It's the state of the diplomatic relations between Mexico and the US under Donald Trump, isn't it? The denial did not trigger diplomatic freeze. It did not trigger reprisals, didn't trigger pressure. It just sat there. And the United States let it sit there, which means every state watching now knows there are places in this script where you can simply say no to the US and nothing actually happens. And that's how power actually ends up collapsing, isn't it? Not with the fall of a military, not with the overthrow of a government, but when obedience stops being assumed. Iran didn't need to push that moment. Iran didn't need to score it. Iran didn't need to turn it into a speech somewhere. They've already outlasted siege and sanctions and proxy war and sabotage and assassinations and cyber operations, and they're still standing. Every attempt to fracture its internal structure, they've survived. Iran knows what endurance looks like. They have endured. Iran knows that time is the real arena. Iran has been playing the long game for 45 years now, since the fall of the Shah. The West still hasn't caught up yet, though. And while that accusation was falling apart in Mexico, the UN letter sat exactly where it needed to be. Not waved around, not brandished, not paraded, just filed. Because the thing about evidence is that it doesn't need attention to gain weight. It just needs to exist. A strike, a statement, a filing. Once those three exist in sequence, they anchor everything that happens afterwards, even if nobody ends up talking about it any further. Especially if nobody talks about it. Because silence is the sound of people checking the exits, isn't it? The balance didn't shift on television, it shifted in the quiet places. The rooms where the diplomats speak plainly. The rooms where security services brief their ministers. The rooms where states decide what they can afford to say and what they can afford to ignore. In those rooms, the Mexico moment landed like a marker. The narrative is no longer assumed, it must now be proven. That's the shift. For years, Iran was named first, and evidence was something that arrived later, if at all. The accusation created the reality. The press repeated it. The public absorbed it. The debate was held inside the frame already drawn, and any state that resisted the frame was labelled compromised, or unstable, or aligned with the enemy, or under influence. The accusation was the reality, but not anymore. Now the question is not, did Iran do this? Now the question is, does the story hold up to the claims? And this time it didn't, which means next time it might not either. And the time after that, even less likely to. Narratives collapse the way buildings collapse, slowly at first, then all at once. You don't see the fracture line until you know where to look. After Mexico, after Trump's admission, everyone knows where to look now. In the Gulf, they watched. No statements, no announcements, just a pause. Iran didn't wobble, Iran didn't lash out, Iran just remained. Iran just was. That lands harder than any show of force does in this instance. Stability's the deterrent. In Europe, it came through tone. The accusation ran once, the denial ran once, then nothing. No appetite to push the line. No one wanted to inherit this story after it's failed so horribly. It fell on its face. And in Washington, the silence was the tell. If they could have pressed Mexico, they would have. If they could have reinforced their claim, they would have. If the machinery still worked, we'd have seen it. We haven't. The non-action is the confirmation, which leaves Iran exactly where it always was to begin with, where it's always aimed to be, unbroken, uncollapsed, unbowed, and critically undeniable. The state that cannot be removed becomes the state that must be negotiated with, not because anyone wants to, but because there is no longer an alternative to that. Iran didn't move, and that's the point. It didn't scramble. It didn't answer the story with another story. It stayed where it was. It let the US and Israel get hamstrung by their own fibs, essentially. A state that stands when it was supposed to buckle tells you everything you need to know about who has the leverage here and who doesn't. The region clocked that without anyone having to say it. After Mexico shut the door on this nonsense, the language about Iran changed. Not openly, you could just hear more hesitation, less confidence. The kind of tone officials use when they know the old line won't land clean anymore. They didn't call the accusation false, they just didn't defend Iran. They just stopped talking like the accusation was automatic. Power doesn't announce when it slips, it shows up in what doesn't happen. No pushback on Mexico, no diplomatic squeeze, no attempt to salvage this story in any way, shape or form. If they could have enforced a narrative, we all know they would have done that. But they didn't. And that's the admission, that's the confession. Nobody won anything here. Iran didn't outmaneuver anybody, Mexico didn't challenge a superpower, the machinery just failed to get off the ground. This excuse went nowhere. Trump and Netanyahu behind the wheel of a truck that they've managed to bog in the mud. They tried to run the usual accusation script, and it didn't take this time. No traction, no uptake. Everyone saw the engine stall, and the pair of them end up to their necks in something brown and squishy. Iran is no longer seen as this destabilizing rogue state in the Middle East. Israel is. And that's how states read the room, not through speeches, through pauses, through delays, through who stops talking and when. Since then, there's been less appetite for escalation, not peace, just calculation. Because once a narrative breaks in public, you don't get to use it the same way again. You now have to prove what you're saying, instead of assuming belief. And proof is work. Proof is slow. Proof exposes to gaps. Proof takes effort. Iran didn't reform. Iran didn't offer concessions. Iran hasn't repositioned themselves in any way. Iran didn't do anything here at all. It was just another attempt at collapse, and the collapse didn't come. Iraq was supposed to stay open. Syria was supposed to stay broken. Lebanon was supposed to stay fragmented. Gaza was meant to be erased. Iran was meant to fold under pressure. None of that so far has actually happened. And Mexico, by simply refusing to pretend, made Israeli and US failure that little bit more visible. Of course, another reason for all of this might be to distract from the fact 37 Israeli officials, including Netanyahu himself, have just had arrest warrants issued for them by Turkey. Not a conspiracy theory at all. But if Turkey thinks we've forgotten that they're still supplying oil to Israel, they can think again about that, and you can find out all about that story in this recommendation here. Please do also hit like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.